ONeil has been the mayor of the town of Sullivan's Island for 6 years, and now he's asking residents to give him another term. I talked one-on-one with the mayor for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Mayor Patrick ONeil, welcome back to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hi, it's great to be back with you, Quintin. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Well, obviously, let me talk to you about the obvious, because you're obviously up for re-election, and you now have an opponent in the race for the mayor of the town of Sullivans Island, I should say. And I want to let viewers know that obviously that particular race will happen on Tuesday. From the time you started campaigning to right now, who is Patrick ONeil as a political candidate?
Who is Patrick ONeil as a political candidate? I like to think is the same Patrick ONeil, the guy who was first elected to council 20 years ago, first elected mayor 6.5 or so years ago, first moved to the island in 1985 and to Charleston area generally in 1975. Obviously, a lot less hair, and what's left is a lot grayer. Skin's probably a good bit thicker since I've been in politics here for a while. But I like to think that I've got the same values about the island that drew me here in 1985.
What are the values now, and what were the values then? I should have said, what were the values then, and what are the values now?
I think for the majority of people who live on Sullivan's Island, it's very, very similar values. We live in a beautiful town, lovely, small, residentially oriented beach community, surrounded by wonderful environmental treasures, the creeks and marsh behind us, the Maritime forest and dunes and beach on the front of the island. Lots of historic structures everywhere, most in private hands, a few owned by us and the federal government. And so the island is permeated with history, and so it keeps us, I think, grounded in knowing that many, many people were here before we got here, and hopefully many, many will be here after we're gone. And I look at it as, as ridiculously high as the real estate prices might be for buying. We buy our little patch of land that our house is on, but I think when it comes to the island, really we're only borrowing it for the time we're here. We want to return it to the next folks in better shape than we got it to start with.
I know that you all are grounded on the town of Sullivan's Island. So if that's the case, why the politics now?
I'm not sure. I said most of us have those kinds of values. I don't intend that to apply to everybody. We've seen in the last 2 years with a different majority on council that there are some people that want to move us in a different direction. From the people that I've spoken to casually and intentionally as I've been campaigning, it certainly seems that that's not a viewpoint of the majority of people who live here. But there's been some concern about changes that have been made, both in the way the town council is working, changes that have been made in terms of how informed our citizens feel about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how soon in advance they get that information. There are always some people who will probably put the dollar before anything else. That is certainly not a widespread value on this island, but you have to be concerned that there are some people who primarily focus on money more than anything else. So if there's a change, I guess there's more of an issue with some small number of people having more of a focus on money here. One of our island clergy a number of years ago raised the question, do we want Sullivan's Island to be a community or a commodity? And I think that's a very relevant choice that's facing us right now.
I want to get back to that in just a second. Let me ask you this. How transparent is Sullivan's Island Town Council?
Not nearly enough recently to satisfy the majority of our citizens. I've been hearing repeatedly over the last year and a half or so from citizens who feel like decisions have been made before people walk into a council meeting. Frankly, sometimes it feels that way. I can't verify that that's the case. People don't feel like they're getting enough notice about important meetings that we have. We obviously have to meet the state requirements for public notices about meetings. That's really only 24 hours. And we've had several really important meetings recently in the last year or so that people got relatively short notice on. One of the meetings in particular was, of course, about the Maritime Forest. We had 100 and some odd people join it, 200 some odd join it on Zoom, I think. And I want to say we had about 80 or so people make public comments. So there was a tremendous level of interest. Many people felt that the scheduling of that meeting was unnecessarily rushed. I think we provided maybe 2 or 3 days notice. I can't say for sure, but it was held on a Friday morning on Zoom. And so a lot of people felt that that was not the way to engage the greatest number of citizens and to let them know what was going on and to feel like the matter was being discussed properly.
Let me just go right there and pick up where Chauncey Clark left off on Monday, obviously. I know that the town went to the court to settle the compromise, and according to him, the court settlement is complete. And I know OCRN, the Corps of Engineers and DHEC, will now review the plans that have been developed as a result of this particular agreement. And he says that he doesn't think those agencies will let us, meaning this town of Sullivan's Island, just decimate the forest. What's your view of the forest right now?
Well, I view that the forest as it is right now is just fine. We've stuck with one modification. We last year, actually about 2 years ago, started a pilot implementation of an idea that I will not be humble. I'll take credit for coming up with it originally many years ago, which was we created what we call a transition zone, which is in front of all the front row houses, the first 100 feet of the town's property, because all of that land is town property. The first 100 feet would be cut significantly because we heard complaints from a lot of people about concerns that it was kind of oppressive with it overgrown that close to their property, up to their property line, that they were not getting the breezes that they might otherwise get. There were concerns about varmints and pests and coyotes, some concerns about fire risk, which were not supported by people that we had brought in with as experts. But nonetheless, we decided to try to create this transition zone where we did a lot of severe cutting to address all of those concerns by the people next door, because, they're island residents too, of course. We implemented this only on a couple of 3 blocks so far, and then have come up with a mechanism to do more of that. So I think that kind of work should continue for those first 100 feet. And beyond that, what I think we should be focusing on is getting rid of invasive species, which could take over and crowd out the naturally occurring vegetation. Having said that, though, we are now under a court order that came from the settlement agreement that 4 of the council members agreed to, which calls for very extensive cutting. It was the original idea as expressed in the settlement agreement were modified somewhat by our engineers based on some conversations with the regulatory agencies. Some people are presenting that as meaning a drastic reduction in how much would be cut. Many of us don't see it that way at all. But it'll be up to the regulatory agencies. We on council have done whatever we can do. We're not allowed to work against it.
Right. Now, what were those experts that you brought in initially when, obviously some people didn't want, they needed a view in front of their homes and all this other stuff?
I'm sorry, what about the experts?
Yeah, what type of experts did you all bring in?
Oh, well, it's been going on for a long time. I'm aware of at least 3 different consultants that we've had. One was a long time ago, actually, a professor at the college. And then when a different group of people came in on council, we decided to go after a team of consultants with different kinds of disciplines represented, such as engineering, forestry, and natural habitat and vegetation. So there was one group that came in that we paid quite a bit of money to, and they studied it and presented reports. We had a number of town meetings about it. People arguing on both sides. I thought that the plan that they had presented wasn't exactly realistic, but it was a starting point at least. And then council proceeded from that over. This is council back then, not the current council, but had many public meetings where we reviewed different areas of the maritime forest. We had what we would have guided tours by experts such as Dr. Porcher, who's a professor of botany retired professor at the Citadel. And everybody who wanted to go could go walking through that piece of the land, and then we would repair to town hall and discuss it. Very participative. That plan actually never quite came to fruition because at some point then we were sued. And it might have been even, I think we were sued after those consultants for first year. I can't remember for sure. But for the longest, our attorneys in that lawsuit, we were sued by the owners of 2 pieces of front row property who were represented by an attorney who owns a 3rd front row lot house. And our attorneys for many years told us we really shouldn't try to implement even the plans that we had all come to some agreement on as long as that lawsuit was out there.
What were the plans then, and would those plans have been updated? Have those plans been updated since?
Those plans have been ignored with the recent settlement, quite frankly. And in fact, there was subsequent to that another group of consultants that were chosen again by the majority of 4 on council, who came in at the invitation of Mr. Clark and others, and there was a much more modest kind of attempt, but they provided a report which then seemed to be mostly ignored by the majority of council as well.
Now, it was reported that Mr. Clark apparently voted to cut down the wax myrtles in front of his house to 3 feet. What was the original mediation agreement? Well, the mediation agreement that is public record, and it's at the website. You can go to it and check it out.
And it's not terribly specific. You couldn't send a crew out there based on this legal document and say, make this happen. Obviously, it needs a lot more specificity. So that's when that started happening. Then the attorneys were chatting with the regulatory agencies and kind of getting some informal feedback about what might not fly with them. We had a survey. We paid for an engineer to survey that land to delineate the wetland areas, and an amazing amount of it is so delineated by those engineers as wetland areas. They may not be considered all to be wetland areas under the definition of the Army Corps of Engineers, but I also don't know what the Office of Coastal Resource Management, which is part of DHEC, I don't know what their definition is.
What is the Corps of Engineers' definition of that?
I don't know. A wetland area under their jurisdiction, I think, I'm not sure that this is the only one subject to their jurisdiction, but they talk about an area that connects with, quote, the waters of the United States of America. So it would be either a river or a creek or an ocean or a lake. And so certainly many of our wetland areas don't connect with the ocean or a creek or anything there. But again, that'll all come up as we go before the regulatory agencies on this. So it's certainly an important issue. It's generated a remarkable amount of interest, and not just in our island residents, but in people who live throughout the region here and beyond.
Now, you say
there's been a lot of other things going on in our town government, with our town government, that I think bear mention, if I may. Not to change the subject, but I'm going to change the subject.
Okay, let me get to this first. Now, you did say, quote, "We must elect people who will fight to protect the gift of God and the Corps of Engineers." How will you protect the gift of God if you're reelected?
Well, let me back up and explain that quote, because I have often referred to this land, and others have too, not unique with me, as being a gift from a gift of God and the Corps of Engineers, because in this regard, we're referring to the Corps of Engineers because they built the Charleston Harbor jetties.
Right.
And most people agree that it was the construction of the jetties in the late 1800s that created the conditions that have allowed our beach to accrete, to grow over time, whereas other beaches up and down the East Coast are eroding. And I've got a running joke with Isle of Palms Mayor Jimmy Carroll and Folly Beach Mayor Tim Goodwin, because Mayor Carroll on the Isle of Palms says we're capturing all of his sand, and Mayor Goodwin says we're catching all of the Isle of Palms sand that ought to be flowing down to him.
Oh.
So it clearly is partly related, at least, to the jetties. What I meant by that was, we cannot, as council members, actively work to undo that agreement, but we can do a number of other very important things. As if there's back and forth with the regulatory agencies, if there's a new council, then there'll be a new group of somewhat different group of people making whatever decisions have to be made there. Once it's all done, we need to assure and do everything we can to prevent additional damage from being done to that very, very important resource.
Now, when the new council does get sworn in soon, when exactly will that be on the agenda to revisit?
Well, we got to wait for it to be on agendas of the regulatory agencies. It's out of our hands now.
Okay, and I want to get to those other issues as well, but you talk about those. I hope I'm getting it right. The improvement issues.
Which?
You just mentioned about those issues with the sand and everything. What other issues do you have in regards to that as far as the town of Sullivan's Island?
Are you talking about the fact that we're accreting land and it's growing?
Accreting issues, that's right. That's
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, God bless it. Keep doing it.
Okay.
That's nature and the Corps of Engineers, so that's going to continue to happen.
Now, how much money are you asking from the state on this issue?
Excuse me, I didn't hear.
Yeah, how much money would you ask from the state to deal with this issue?
We don't ask for money from the state for this.
Okay.
We don't renourish the beach here,
right,
as a town. We don't go to the state and ask for money for beach renourishment,
right,
primarily because we don't have a problem that requires renourishment.
Okay.
There's a very small area up by Breach Inlet, the Desi Road,
right,
and some of those property owners periodically will go to OCRM and apply for a permit to bring in sand at their own expense in front of their houses.
Okay. And let me go back to the Maritime Force. How do you expect to manage that going forth?
Well, the first thing that's going to happen is we find out what cutting will be allowed of the cutting that is required by the agreement. And then the town is responsible for creating the transition zone, that 100-foot band that I told you about next to the private property owners. But beyond that, it will have to be paid for by adjacent property owners. And I think we said that would be done on a block-by-block basis. I can't remember. And there's a time limit to how much time they have to make a commitment, make a financial commitment to do it. So they would pay the town to have it done. The town would then retain the contractors to do that because it's important that the town has control of how the work gets done.
And how much would that cost? How much would they have to pay the town of Sullivan's Island?
I don't have a dollar amount in mind, but I can tell you it'll be pretty costly.
Now, how do you hope to open the force up to for visibility, that is?
What do you mean for visibility?
As far as allowing people to walk through and, all sorts of things?
Well, it's right now, anybody who wishes to can go anywhere they want in that accreted land, Quintin.
Okay.
And it's absolutely open to the public. And in fact, the town got money from the county Greenbelt Fund.
Right.
A number of years ago, I was one of the leaders for that. And we constructed a nature trail on the western side of the Station 16 path. That part is left out of this agreement, thank God.
Okay.
So that's all the part that's in front of the Fort the National Park Service property.
Right.
And we've been welcoming people in there on that trail, which goes through a variety of different kinds of terrains. If you've not done it, I really encourage you to do it.
Sure.
And it's absolutely open to the public. I was in there talking to another reporter who wanted to talk about all of that, and I took her to some of that part of the trail. And at one point we stopped, and I thought we were going to get run over because it was person after person coming through with kids. I mean, it was just great. You know, people with backpacks on, not to camp. Don't get me wrong, no camping. But people taking their kids out there to look at it and enjoy it and experience it.
Yes, sir.
And all of it is open at this time to the public, people who want to venture in where it might be a little more heavily vegetated. We do ask people to stay off the dunes because they're fragile.
Fragile. Yes, sir. You just answered my last question there, too. But what's the current engineering study that you're looking at when it comes to this maritime forest?
What's the current what?
Engineering study that you're looking at when it comes to this maritime forest?
Well, the engineering work is being done, or what is being done in preparing what's called a work plan to make it happen.
Okay.
They specify which trees of which type and the methods and means that they're going to use to do that.
Absolutely.
So, for example, will they be able to use mechanical equipment to remove what gets cut? Will they have to remove it by hand? I think the plan prohibits much in the way of mechanized vehicles going out there and further destroying that property as a lot of the vegetation is being destroyed. So, all of those things have to be worked out.
Now,
and it'll go to the regulatory agencies.
Absolutely. And let me reset and talk about your campaign. You said this on your website, Strong Leadership for Challenging Times. Let me ask you a simple question. How has your strong leadership been challenged?
Well, it's been challenged by a number of things. I was having trouble coming up with all the hurricanes that have happened since I assumed the mayor's position a little more than 6 years ago. I counted at least 4, and I named them in that ad. I don't remember what they are. We had you may remember the 1,000-year flood that we had, which I think was 2015.
Right. We
had a substantial ice storm in 2018.
Right.
A relatively minor challenge we had, but one that we had to prepare for. As you remember, the total eclipse
a
few years ago, and
sure.
We were designated one of the best viewing areas for that. So that was another time when we partnered with the other governmental agencies in the surrounding area to come up with a joint coordinated plan that we had to accommodate what we expected would be a rush of traffic, a rush of visitors coming to the beach. And it was a good thing we did all that planning because we did have a very, very large crowd and possibly the best behaved crowd I've ever seen out here.
That's amazing.
In fact, I was at a meeting with, not long after that, with a number of people, and we heard from the head of the State Parks Department, and he was talking about their experience. And he had the same thing to say for all the state parks that were involved. He said, these are the best visitors we've ever had. So,
wow.
But we had to make sure we could get emergency vehicles in. In fact, in one of our planning meetings, we had representatives from the Coast Guard there.
Right.
And of course, they control the bridges that have to open and close.
Cool.
And so I said to a couple of my colleagues, I'm going to go ask those guys if there's a way they can avoid raising the bridge or opening the bridge for boat traffic when we're going to be overrun with eclipse visitors. And my colleagues said they'll never do that. And anyway, I went to these guys, and I didn't mind asking them stupid questions, so I asked them. And the guy said, well, let's see what we can do. And sure enough, they were able to make that happen. So, for example, the Wando Bridge, the Wapu Cut Bridge, the Wapu Cut Bridge did not open during those busy eclipse hours. The Ben Sawyer Bridge did not open. You can only imagine the traffic log jams we'd have had if they had opened. Because a lot of people were out on boats to watch the eclipse anyway. So. Right. We've had other things, and then it's difficult to forget we've been dealing with a pandemic now for 14, 15 months.
Yes,
And
sir.
I would say in my tenure as mayor, that's probably been clearly the most challenging of the emergencies we've had to contend with, the most pressing of and long-standing, long-lasting, and intense challenge that we faced. And I'm not trying to say, woe is me. I don't think there's a mayor on the planet that had much fun in the last 14 months, because mayors everywhere in all countries have been having to deal with the different kinds of issues associated with the pandemic.
Yes, sir.
And that's a challenge for our council, obviously, as well. And it was a real challenge for our public safety people, police and some fire, who had to man those checkpoints when we had to restrict the island for a couple of months, I guess it was last year.
Right. Absolutely. And speaking of which, what are your current budget rules due to COVID?
What are our budget rules?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure what you mean about the relation of that with COVID.
Yes, sir. When you look at your budget, what do you guys cannot do right now in relation to COVID? What can you not spend because of COVID? What can you not do because of COVID?
Well, we've had to be, fairly prudent in our budgeting to the extent that we get money from hospitality taxes that customers pay to the island restaurants, and the little bit that we get from accommodations taxes. We have very few vacation rentals here. We are applying for reimbursement from FEMA and from the state for every dime we spent and are spending still that we can attribute to the pandemic. So as far as covering pandemic expenses, we're working hard and so far have been successful. We think we've been successful in getting those handled. And as far as dealing with the reduction in revenue, it's really not hit us nearly as hard as it's hit a lot of other, particularly tourist-oriented cities. The city of Charleston, for example, Myrtle Beach, that really depend on accommodations taxes from hotel guests, and even way more hospitality taxes from visitors. And if the restaurants are shut down, there's none of that going to happen. If the hotels are closed, you're not getting any accommodation taxes. You're not going to get any accommodation taxes from, we don't have Airbnbs here, but they're limited, but from Airbnbs and so on when nobody's traveling anywhere because they can't do anything once they get there. So in that regard, I think we've been able to handle that piece of that challenge pretty well. The big challenge and more important has been preserving the safety and the health of our residents and our visitors.
Yes, indeed.
Through all of this. And, as you've seen everywhere, and particularly here, any step that we took to try to do that, there were always people who vehemently objected to it for one reason or another.
Well, let me just jump right into it. A lot of people are vehemently objected against, obviously, paid parking on Sullivan's Island. Where are you with that?
What I've said, and I've been criticized for it, but it's not contradictory. I've said right now I don't want to have anything to do with it. I think it's inappropriate that we look at that right now. I don't think it's completely necessary right now. Why do I think we should not do it now? For one thing, based on the efforts that we had to take because of the pandemic, where we restricted access to the island, we restricted access to the beaches, we restricted what people could do once they got to the beaches. There was a tremendous amount of resistance that developed from people in the surrounding area of the Low Country and beyond, who accused us of being elitist and so on. I mean, and that was not a fair criticism in my view. We were doing what we had to do to keep everybody safe. But coming on the heels of that, the last thing I would want to do is say, okay, we're back open, and by the way, we're going to make you pay to get in, or at least to park on our streets. One of the council members who was most in favor of this brought in a potential vendor, a company that manages parking systems for municipalities and others, and they brought in some, hypothetical, some projected numbers. I frankly didn't like the numbers that I saw, because too much of what people would have been paying to park was going to this company. Now, mind you, they have to make money. They've got to pay for their expenses. But it just seemed like, to me, if that's the only way you can do it at this point in time, we shouldn't do it. I don't want to make Quintin, Washington, pay $10 to park to go to the beach when I'm taking $4 of those dollars and handing them over to a private company.
And the town wasn't getting any money back.
Oh, no, we would be getting the remainder.
Okay.
But the other thing is, it really is a sort of intensive kind of effort that it requires a lot of manpower. I'll grant them that. The other thing is, I've had lots and lots of island residents say this just goes against the feel and the traditions of Sullivan's Island. This seems to be antithetical to what Sullivan's Island stands for, which is natural, laid back, welcoming, and this is everything but. Now, I do say never, because we've got a lot of expenses that we incur dealing with the folks who come out to the beach, which they've been doing, by the way, for generations. That's nothing new. The cost of everything gets more expensive over time. And right now, we don't get much support from the state or the county for the things that we have to do to keep all these visitors safe. We get nothing much from the state as far as keeping up the parking spaces that belong to the Department of Transportation. So we do have legitimate expenses. And what I think we need to do is work much harder. And I think the timing is right for this, because there's been such an uproar about paid parking over on the Isle of Palms. Secretary of Transportation, Christy Hall, has been down here several times. I've been in a couple of meetings with her yesterday, for example, about beach traffic management. But I think this may be a point where a lot of communities have made the case that, look, we really do incur a lot of expenses with handling beach traffic, and certainly maybe you should give us some support, because it's regional people that are coming here. But right now it's being borne completely by our taxpayers on the island. So that's why I say never, but I will say not now.
Okay. But then that brings me to my next question. What traffic management plan does the island have for parking?
Well, we have a good plan for parking. It was adopted a number of years ago.
Okay.
I'm talking about the parking. Let's separate out parking and traffic.
Okay.
The traffic is when they're coming to or from.
Right.
The parking is where do they go when they're here? And about 5 or so years ago, we switched over to having parking only on one side of the street, on nearly all the streets, with the exception of Middle Street in many places,
right,
because it's so much wider.
Right.
And the reason we did that is because, other than Middle Street and Jasper,
yes,
we don't have sidewalks.
Right. And
so we've got relatively narrow neighborhood streets, but that we had people parking on the shoulders on both sides.
Right.
We had two-way traffic. And we had two-way pedestrian traffic with people using the street as a sidewalk, because we didn't give them a sidewalk. And there was a huge concern with the ability of emergency vehicles, fire trucks or ambulances, or our beach rescue people, to get where they needed to be and get there very, very quickly because of the tie-up with all of that. So we said we're going to remove parking from one side of the street. And we came up with a way to do that. And we still have, I apologize, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think we have more spaces vacant than we have that are being utilized. Okay. So we do not have a shortage of parking spaces here. People may need to walk a few blocks, but if you look at the real estate ads, there's not a property that gets listed on this island that doesn't include the catchphrase, walk to the beach. So, that's what the visitors may want to do that as well. Traffic is a different matter, okay? And the people who've been here for a long time will tell you summer traffic has always been a beast on weekends, at least, particularly on holidays. And traffic has always been a beast on the first really nice weekend of the year. And sure enough, that weekend came mighty early this year in February.
Right.
And we were slammed. And I think it was not only the first pleasant weather, but it was also people with, pandemic cabin fever wanting to get out. We have previously worked in coordination, or tried to work in coordination with some of the other governmental agencies, the other municipalities such as Isle of Palms and Mount Pleasant. We had meetings a couple of 3 years ago with the Council of Government staff and the then Council Chairman Elliott Summey and the Sheriff Hal Cannon, who was sheriff then, and several of our other beach mayors to try to find some ways to alleviate some of the traffic problems. One of the things that came for that was trying to coordinate the information from the beach traffic cameras that we have.
Right.
And I'm very proud to say that I got to Island our first beach traffic cameras, when the then mayor of Mount Pleasant and I went to county council and asked for them to pay for it, and they did. And so there are others of those cameras that show the conditions of beach traffic for Folly and for Isle of Palms. So a couple of years ago, the county and the Council of Governments came up. They supported doing this. They paid for it, developing an app which is called Beach Reach. Beach Reach. And with that app, you can go quickly to the beach traffic cameras and see what conditions are like. And it's been promoted some. I think we all need to promote it much, much, much more, so that people's first instinct when they get ready to leave home to go to the beach is to go to that app or to the SCDOT 511
Right.
app and answer for themselves the question, what's the traffic like right now? And, you can go to Waze and see what color the streets are. I don't think that communicates the information as clearly as if you're looking at a real-time camera showing you whether traffic is zipping along or whether traffic is flat out stopped. So we had a meeting just yesterday, so this was Wednesday of this week, with the local mayors, our town administrators, our police chiefs, Secretary of Transportation, Christy Hall, who was there with a couple of her important administrative people, along with one of the members of the Department of Transportation Commission, who handles our area, and representatives from the Council of Governments. And we had a really useful discussion of ways that perhaps the different entities within the Tri-County area could try to work more in conjunction and coordination to try to manage the traffic that's going to come to the beach. And so, as we all agree, we're not going to build any more roads. We're not going to widen any roads that go directly to the beach right now. That's fixed. And Isle of Palms, Folly, and Sullivan's Island have only one or two ways on and off. And if you count 2 ways on and off for Isle of Palms and us, it's because the other way is going through the other island, which has one other way. So we talked about different approaches to traffic management, perhaps some lessons that can be learned from how police traffic experts handle major event traffic like football games, college football games, big holidays and things like that.
Now,
we're not going to get 80 state troopers to be out there directing traffic for the beach, I can tell you that.
Right.
But if there's some lessons that we can learn about, what to give priority to, which traffic to prioritize at the peak demands, and again, working more and trying to tweak things more as well with timing of signal traffic lights. In our case, it's traffic lights in Mount Pleasant. So our chief has been working in collaboration with the Mount Pleasant chief with that, and I think they continue to try to work on that. So it's clearly a regional issue. It demands a regional solution. And it's, we had a great meeting yesterday. That was not the beginning of our efforts to approach it regionally, and it certainly won't be the end of it.
Now, any beach path maintenance in your plan?
Well, not for the traffic, no. But we already have been maintaining beach paths for decades here. The town typically has to provide the manpower to keep the beach paths clear We have increasing numbers of boardwalks and beach paths, and the town has had to pay to build those and then to maintain and replace them when their life expires. We've been fortunate. Our town administrator has been quite good at going after appropriate county and state funding that can be used for those purposes. We can use some of our accommodations tax money for that purpose because it is something that is designed to provide resources for people who visit here as well as our residents.
Now, in your first 100 days, if you're elected, what will you do on day one?
Well, I've had my first 100 days many times already because, remember, I'm in my 6th year right now. And, what I'm going to do is continue to do what I've been doing, which is try to press forward with improvements for the town. In particular, pressing forward with what we've already been doing, but we still have some other projects to complete and finish and start, which is dealing with our infrastructure. During the time I'm mayor, we've launched and we're about to finish a very major, almost complete rebuild of our sewer treatment plant. This is a big and expensive enterprise. So we went out and got the money for that. We got hung up trying to get money from FEMA for that, and FEMA sat on our application for a long time. Then finally got it, after more than a year, they finally looked at it and said, "Oh, we forgot to tell you the standards have changed. You'll need to redo this all over again." So we decided at that point we were going to go out, and rather than let things continue to deteriorate, we were going to go out and get money to do that and related capital projects. So we've had 2 major bond issues that we've done of $18 to $20 million each, using an innovative funding mechanism. It's called installment purchase revenue bonds, but it's a way that municipalities, governmental agencies can borrow money without jeopardizing their limited bonding capacity. So we did that. We got great interest rates on those bonds because we've got a great credit rating. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, Moody's gave us an AA1 rating, which is one notch down from top of the line from municipality, and which is very unusual for a town this small to get.
Right.
So we got that funding, so we pressed forward with that. Hopefully within my first 100 days of my new term, we'll be able to cut a ribbon for that, or at least a strip of toilet paper. I don't know what it'll be. We've also been working on this collection system that feeds that treatment plant, which is expensive and which requires some structures that are called lift stations because it's based on gravity. So those are being replaced right now as well, and that was another expensive proposition. We've had to rebuild the fire station, and we're about to get to a contracting point on that. To do it, we've been working hand in hand with the contractor and the architect and the engineers on that, along with a building to house all of our vehicles and equipment to try to better protect them and provide space for our maintenance staff. So I think that's important. We've got some other maintenance things that we need to catch up on some of our historic properties that the town owns. When we get the maintenance barn built, then we can move those operations out of our old town hall, which is a historic building.
Right.
And then we can talk about what we should do to either renovate it or to sell it to a private buyer.
Now,
be expected to renovate.
And if you were to sell it to a private developer or whatever, how much would that bring in for this town of Sullivan's House?
I hope an awful lot.
Okay.
But I have no idea. Even if I did, I wouldn't say because you don't.
Right.
You won't list it. But again, that's first we got to get the vehicles out of there, and then we can do that.
And how many big vehicles are we talking?
Well, it depends. I'm using a broad definition of vehicle.
Okay.
I mean, the police cars are out on the street where they should be.
Right.
And the vehicles that are used by town staff, other town staff in their duties are on the street where they should be. For example, our building inspector, our zoning management, town administrator, and so on. But we've got tractors, we've got maintenance trucks, for the water and sewer department that are stored overnight. We've got, a variety of things of grass cutting and weeding and the equipment that we need, the tractors that we need to cut grass on the rights of way, the tractors that we need to maintain the beach paths, all of those things.
Now, let me go back to that sewer plant. How much money are we talking with that in regards to that?
I believe the number's about $14 or $15 million. I'm working from memory, and of course,
Right.
the number was fresh in my head when we had to launch it. But that doesn't include the sewer collection system, and that's several $1 million as well.
Okay.
It always astounds me how much this type of work costs. But
And
it
what
does.
what were those standards as far as the application to FEMA?
With FEMA, the big thing was you have to build it to withstand a given level of a flood.
Hmm.
And I don't remember if they went from 100-year flood to 500-year or what it was, but at any rate, that raised by a few feet the elevation and the height that we would have to have for the plant. And that would have meant completely new engineering, and then going back to FEMA. And had we decided to go back to them, it would have strung things out another probably 2 or 3 years. And then there was a very limited amount of funding we were able to get through this grant program anyway.
Right.
And so our concern was, if we waited long enough to get those small, $3 million, I think, for which we would have to pay another $1 million. But in that amount of time, we could suffer more deterioration to the existing plant, which was built in the 60s, mind you.
Right.
I mean, this wasn't something that just all of a sudden started deteriorating. The other thing you have to understand is the tax base on the island now is tremendously different than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. The town could not have afforded to do all of this work on its own that long ago with the tax base that we had. The home values were much, much lower back then.
And let me ask you, what exactly is the current tax base?
I don't know the number off the top of my head, Quintin. We get that number every year as we're doing budgets when we figure out what the millage is going to be. But I mean, if you think about it, you can read the real estate ads for houses on the island. We've got, I think, between 900 and 1,000 homes and properties on the island. And you can look at the current listing prices that are in the millions of dollars.
Right.
So if you do the value assessment for the whole island, that's way up there. And I mean, that's something we should all feel good about.
And what was the millage rate, 3-4 years ago?
Well, we've had to raise the amount of money, the millage rate, and I like the way you ask that because that's more specific.
Okay.
We talk in mills, which is 0.1%.
Right.
And of course, we've had to raise the millage rate substantially for the payments on our bonds that we issued over a long period of time. So we took that into account, and so we've had 2 times that we've had to raise the millage rate for that. And other than that, it's not gone up a tremendous amount. We're really limited in how much we can raise it, and you're limited to, basic. You can't even change the percentage based on the value of your tax base. The total amount that a municipality can bring in dollars is limited by the state, and it can increase if your tax base increases. Okay, it can increase if your population increases, and it can increase with the cost of living increases, which have typically been very, very, very low in the last number of years.
Now, where has the population increased on the island? I should say.
We don't have one, so that's an interesting piece of it as well. So I'm glad you raised it.
Okay.
So a town that's growing really rapidly, like our friends in Mount Pleasant,
Right.
with a large increase in population, their tax base is going to go up markedly, and their ability to tax is going to go up markedly more than ours. Nobody here is complaining about our population being static.
Hmm.
We're happy where we are with that. and we're nearly completely built out. So
Right, exactly right. Now you talked earlier, obviously, about the Moody's bonds, and obviously the town's in great standing. What is that bonding capacity?
well, the bonding capacity is limited by I think it's a percentage. I think it's a percentage of your. I don't know.
Okay,
I mean, it's a known fact off the top of my head. I can't remember, but you're limited to a small percentage of either your annual revenues or your tax base.
okay.
And I apologize for not having that right off the tip of my tongue.
No worries. And you
Uh,
talked earlier about that collection.
But that's why the installment purchase revenue bonds were so important,
Right,
because it allowed us another avenue to go after getting money for capital projects,
right,
apart from the limits on what are called general obligation bonds.
right,
We talk about limited bonding capacity. We're talking about what are called general obligation bonds,
right.
and those are bonds where what stands behind them is simply the full faith and credit of the town.
Mm. And I want to go back to the collection stage system, that is, because you talked about lift stations. Where exactly will those be, or are those on the island?
They're in 5 different locations on the island. They have to cover the length of the island.
Okay,
As I said, the system is gravity fed,
right,
and everything flows downhill, as the saying goes, but we don't have any hills.
right.
So it can only go downhill so far before you need a lift station to raise it back up and start another downhill
Wow.
journey.
Okay.
Hammer
And
stuff.
oh yes, indeed. I'm learning a lot here. And the contract, obviously, with the fire station. How long has that been going on?
We've been working on the plans for the fire station for more than a year now, I think. And I don't mean the architectural plans necessarily,
Right.
but planning to have this work done.
Okay. And when do you expect all of this to be completed?
I'm at the point now where I've given up on predicting completion dates until we have a completion date from the contractor.
And do you have that?
And so we don't have that yet for good reason.
Okay.
And one reason is we're waiting on the county and the state to give their stamp of approval on what we would be doing that might affect stormwater runoff. So here we are back at stormwater. So we've got to get all those approvals before we can then finally we've identified our contractor, and we're using a process that's called construction manager at risk. And what that means is, rather than going to an architect, an engineer, and getting plans drawn up, and then putting them out for bid, and then passing out when you get the bids that come in because they're way too high, and then having to go back and forth. This way, you identify your architect, you identify through we advertised for statements of qualifications for different contractors and architectural firms, and we selected one of each. And so those 2 entities, along with the owner, which is the town, work together on developing the final plans, or the next to final plans. And that way, all along, if we're getting more and more precise estimates of what it would cost. And so as you go through that process, and then the contractor says, well, it looks like based on what our subcontractors are going to want, it'll cost this much. And then we can say, oops, we need to scale that back. Right. And so you go back and change the plans a little bit to, go from A to B and whatever.
Yeah. And what are those qualifications typically?
What are what?
The qualifications that you mentioned earlier. What are those typically?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to hire, who you're trying to hire, what kind of entity you're trying to hire. And we had them stipulated for the architectural firm, and we had them stipulated for the contractor. And those proposals went out a long time ago. I no longer remember any specifics from them.
Okay.
But they were all publicly advertised.
Okay. Well, Pat ONeil, Mayor of the town of Sullivan's Island, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you very much for having me, Quintin. I really appreciate it. Have a good day.
Likewise.